This meeting is being recorded.
When you're working with the REPC, when you're working with a buyer who is selling, obviously looking to buy a home, paragraph 2.1 in the REPC requires that you mark whether or not the purchase of the home is contingent upon the sale of another property. It used to be worded sale of another home. Now it's just listed as property. If the buyer marks yes, the qualifying to buy this is related to sale of any other property, the subject to sale addendum is required to be added on there so that the seller of the home they put in the offer on knows or has disclosed to them what the status of that contingent property is. So what you mark on here and fill out depends on how far your buyer is on the selling the other property process. The first choice is that you have to list where the property is located. Even if this property is in some other state, it has to be disclosed. I had sellers who were selling a home in a property in San Diego to move here. We had to mark San Diego. I've had Sonoma, California. I've got one coming up that would be there in Illinois. A lot of times when people are moving here from out of state, you kind of see that. Okay. This is to help protect the buyer in dealing with the sale of their home. They still retain the right that's in the REPC to cancel the contract before the due diligence deadline or the financing and appraisal deadline, just the way it is in the contract. If they cancel before due diligence deadline, then it follows whatever is in the contract about what's going to happen with the earnest money that was put down. Same with the financing and appraisal deadline.
Okay.
Okay. This also states what's going to happen if they have to cancel after the due diligence deadline or after that financing deadline. And this says earnest money or deposits shall be released to the seller without written further authorization from the buyer. And that the seller accepts as exclusive remedy the earnest money deposits. This is a change from what is actually in the REPC. Paragraph 8.1 in the REPC, as you go through it, is probably the most argued about part of that one, because that's what happens with earnest money when somebody cancels. Because the seller has three choices. Take the earnest money as liquidated damages and everybody's done. Earnest money stays in escrow and you sue for specific performance. Sue to force the buyer to go through with it, or keep the money in escrow and figure out what else can happen under the law.
Gotcha.
But they can't take the earnest money and sue the buyer. It's one of those pick your poison.
Can they sue for more than the earnest money?
No. What they can sue, well, and that's what that sort of no. That's what that other remedies at law could be.
Gotcha.
If they felt like that the earnest money was not adequate liquidated damages, they could sue for additional damages.
Understood.
But the contract also says once you get the lawyers involved, you pay for your own lawyers until it's done. And if you lose,
I was just about to say that's what it was saying to me when I was just going through the REPC was the loser typically pays the buyer's legal fees, but only court legal fees, not actual when they go what is it when you're just talking to the lawyer, not in court, right?
Yep. Yeah, the court will determine how much of the loser gets to pay for the other side.
Understood.
So it could get really expensive.
I've had a few cases with lawyers, and yeah, I always walked away with a lighter pocketbook.
It's never cheap. when I worked for my brother, who was an attorney as his paralegal, they were just starting to use a new system that as soon as you answered the phone, they had a digital timer that started, because it would, every 5 minutes, it would keep track of how much to charge.
Yeah, I had a strange situation where I was renting a property back in Chicago, and it was through a relocation company who signed the lease, and the actual guy who was staying in the property was not on the lease. His insurance company stopped paying. He stayed. The relocation company cut ties with me, so I went into litigation about it, and it took like 9 months, and I paid the mortgage for 9 months, and in the end, I lost probably 20 grand. It was just terrible.
There's nothing speedy about a speedy trial. But
Yeah, it was tough. I learned a lot, though. Let me tell you, I feel like I know a little bit more about real estate than your average person because of it.
Yeah. But this is why the seller needs to understand that the seller is agreeing that the earnest money is all they're going to get.
Understood.
Because it can be really hard for them to try to successfully sue the other side to force the purchase of the home if that buyer wasn't able to sell the property that was going to get the financing to buy the new one. They just aren't going. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
This part, paragraph 2, is where the seller has to disclose what's going on with the property, if it is or is not currently listed. And then the name of the listing agent and brokerage. Now, last year when the market, 2020, 2021, 2022, if buyers were marking it's not even currently listed and it will be in the future, they put them in a real bad spot because sellers didn't want to have to wait for them to put it on the market to then try to sell it.
Yeah.
Because they also have to declare whether or not it is or is not currently under contract. Even if it was actively on the market but not under contract, still put them behind somebody that was actively on the market and is under contract. And what many were choosing to do was sell the home outright, lease it back for 30 days, basically become a renter in the home they were already living in, to be able to then put on their next offer. It's not contingent on the sale. We already did that. We've got the money. We're moving forward.
There's definitely a fine line there.
And it's part of the strategy. My buyer, like so they've got buyers who are moving here from Illinois. Right now, they would have to mark that it is contingent. In fact, when they start making offers, we'll have to mark that. But the plan is to get under contract in Illinois first so that we can mark they are under contract.
Gotcha.
And that way it looks pretty solid. The next thing that happens with this is then you have as agents, now you're dealing with 3 agents all kind of tied together in one transaction. The listing agent for the home they're buying, you as their buying agent, and sometimes you'll be their listing agent as well, or if they're moving out of state, wherever they're moving from, you have to line up all the deadlines to get the house that has the property that has to sell first sold. And then there's usually a 48-hour delay thanks to title law, because that has to fund and record, be in the bank for this buyer to now sign the paperwork to buy the move-up house. And then
that's basically another
record. And then
that's another 45 days, right? Essentially, another 45 days.
It could take up to 4 days on the Utah REPC. It could take up to 4 days, and then of course, whoever if that buyer's now seller's got to buy whatever they're buying. So then you have to work out possession going backward, that the person who sold first moves last, because everybody ahead of them's got to move out.
Yeah, I would assume that that all needs to be handled very efficiently for that client, especially being that they are now getting out of their residence and need a new residence. So,
and that's why when you look on the REPC, when it's with the area for possession, you can take it upon recording. Then it'll show hours after recording, like 48 to 72 is usually what people put. If it's more than 3 days, then they're going to mark that how many days after recording.
Gotcha.
If it's more than about 4 or 5 days, then you're going to be looking at using that lease back agreement probably, especially if they're going to be there a couple of weeks, because the buyer, now temporary landlord, wants to be protected.
Right.
So there's a form for that so that you don't have to try to make up what happens next.
Like, is it specifically called like a lease back form for a temporary period of time or whatever?
Short-term lease back agreement. I'll send you, when we're done, I'll send you an email, excuse me, a text message with my YouTube channel for our training videos. We did the short-term lease back agreement a couple of days ago.
Okay.
But that also could become part of this as well. Is if now that buyer, the person selling the home, needs to stay in it more than a few days. Underwriting, Jason, now that he's bailed on us, underwriting is going to want to see what kind of precautions there are to make sure the home is still in good condition when they move out and everybody moves up.
Gotcha.
And you're right, it takes a lot of coordination. That's why we work with one advantage working with transaction coordinator is that they help with that. Our transaction coordinator we contract with, Amory, has everybody on a calendar. And if it looks like there's going to be a need to change any dates, you've got to be able to coordinate that with everybody, especially if it's settlement, because you don't want to mess everybody else may have to adjust. So that's why we try to give a little bit of lag between each settlement in case something goes a little weird at the end.
Gotcha.
And it always does.
The nature of the beast.
The weirdest I had was a phone call with 2 other agents explaining that we needed to delay settlement because the buyer knew he was being activated and being sent overseas at the height of COVID with the National Guard, but because of COVID, all of their dates kept moving around because they couldn't put them all on the plane at once. They'd only put half the unit on the plane at once, so they could all be 1 seat apart. So the day he was supposed to be signing paperwork, he was going to be in an airplane to Afghanistan, but the VA required proof that he'd made it there alive, but he couldn't provide proof he was there alive until he got there alive. And the day that we were supposed to be signing paperwork was the day he ended up being in the airplane.
Oh, wow.
So, I couldn't make this up, folks. Sorry, we have to delay 24 hours. His butt's on the ground. His boots are on the ground in Afghanistan.
And power of attorney wouldn't even work for that matter because they need to know that he's alive, right?
Yep. His wife already had the durable power of attorney. We already had that all worked out. But until his boots were on the ground out of the air.
Wild.
So those kind of dominoes can come about a lot with this as well. Buyer number 1 that's starting all of these dominoes in a row has some hiccup and needs to delay, which means everybody else up the food chain has to delay. The other one I want to look at, that in the exclusive buyer broker agency agreement, the buyer broker agency agreement specifically refers to the buyer due diligence checklist and the wire fraud alert disclosure. These two have to be completed for the buyer broker agency agreement to be considered complete. But this is just a checklist. This is just a list of everything a buyer can have checked during their due diligence deadline, before the due diligence deadline on the contract. They could cancel the contract for any of these terms and not have to disclose to the seller, except that they're canceling under due diligence.
Gotcha.
Okay.
That's all. No more needs to be discussed, huh?
Nope. You have the inspection. I've had buyers back out with it. I had a listing that we were up till 10:30 at night working with both agents, I was listing agent, buyer's agent, got everything ready, got all the signatures. Everybody was super, super excited. And then the buyers had changed their mind overnight.
Wow.
Just left and just bailed. And all they had to mark was they canceled before buyer due diligence check deadline. That was it. They were out.
So did they forfeit their earnest money then?
Nope, because of the way it was worded in the contract, it would only it wasn't non-refundable. It could have been made that way. In fact, when the market in 2020 and 21 and 22, There were buyers that were willing to put their earnest money and make it non-refundable upon acceptance of the contract. But that meant they were gambling their earnest money if something came up during due diligence.
Gotcha.
What they do have the right to do is use this addendum if something comes up during due diligence, how they chose and negotiated and resolved it with the seller.
I see.
And this codifies, this memorializes whatever you decide to do, makes it permanent. What had started to happen, to be honest with you, was that agents were just doing, we'll just send an email over with a list of things to repairs, just let us know when it got done.
Okay.
And then when it didn't get done, the buyer had no legal recourse because they didn't actually have an enforceable contract. They had an email.
Yeah.
And this addendum has been around since 2017. We just people just weren't using it until the division finally had to put out a statement, knock it off. The Salt Lake board, the attorney that's the head of the Salt Lake board, sent out a letter to everybody and notice to everybody, knock it off.
Wow.
Use the form. That's why it's there. So the form allows them to choose any combination of any of these. They could choose to just say, sellers like, you know what, I don't live in state, I don't want to deal with this. I'm just going to give you a credit at closing. Here's how much. Go away.
Yeah. Wow.
They could choose to reduce the purchase price. This you could see if it's something major. Roof has to be got to be replaced. And keep in mind, this only works. So most people are going to go for option number 3 to have repairs made, because with FHA and VA loans, if the appraiser has determined that the home doesn't meet the safe, structurally sound, and sanitary requirements, there's damage to the property that makes it, in the appraiser's eyes, unsafe. Broken glass, flaking lead-based, pre-1978 paint, missing a handrail on the stairs are some of the most common ones. They can make that a condition of the loan, and the loan can't go forward until the repair is done.
So there has to be a certain money threshold, right? Though, I mean, if somebody wanted a new roof on there, for instance, right?
In the FHA VA addendum, they put in there what that dollar threshold will be. The seller will be required to cover.
Got it.
The VA changed their rules this year because Congress changed them, that now allows the buyer to pay for the repairs in order to keep progressing through the loan process. Before that, if the seller said, no, I'm not going to do it, and it was a condition of the loan, the buyer really had no recourse but to cancel.
Gotcha.
Because the home wouldn't qualify. We got
but now they have the option to pay it forward and then recoup it at the sale, or is it just
basically that's kind of what it would be. They paid for the repairs now, and when they sell, at sometime in the indeterminate future, hopefully recoup the loss.
Got it.
The third one is you make a list of the specific repairs that are being requested. Now, the other remedy behind this is it allows them to decide what's going to happen if the repairs aren't done by the settlement deadline. Because sometimes they may take longer than the due diligence deadline. You gave 2 weeks to do the inspection. Yep, you know what? We found a problem on day 5, but that problem's going to take another 2 weeks to fix. Now we're past that deadline. How do we protect the buyer? Buyer can choose to cancel and keep their earnest money. Buyer can go through with the purchase the way that it is, but this list of repairs survives closing. The seller's still responsible for finishing the repairs.
Got it.
And this states right here that the due diligence is not being waived. They could still choose to cancel under the due diligence deadline if they're not at that contract deadline date yet. They could get cold feet and think, you know what, never mind, I don't want to wait for a new roof. I'm out.
Wow.
Now, understand that FHA and VA aren't going to let you hold on to repairs and have them be completed after closing
Oh, wow.
because it's a condition for the loan.
So it's only conventional for that?
You what?
It would be only a conventional loan would allow that?
And only if the lender says yes.
Gotcha.
The lender can say, okay, we'll do that. We'll hold money in escrow at closing to complete the work, but they can put terms on it like wanting to see all the bids, who the contractors are, who's doing the work, and they're not going to pay that work until they have proof of completion.
Got it.
So that's why we still protect them under this. If you're looking at this, and one of the things you could do with this as well is you can then choose to extend the due diligence deadline while the seller finds out what it's really going to cost them to get all that work done.
Gotcha. And would that be another addendum then to extend the deadline?
Unfortunately, because this doesn't have a spot to fill in to add that, yes, you would have to do another addendum. It's just the blank addendum and put buyer due diligence deadline shall be, and you may end up having to move the financing and appraisal deadline, especially if getting financing and appraisal, the financing or the appraising on it is contingent on finishing all these repairs.
Got it.
So you end up using a separate one. Okay, Zoom's telling me we got 2 minutes and 50 seconds left. I'm going to do this. I'm actually going to stop the recording.
Okay.